Hello and welcome to our next episode of A Better Shrewsbury, which is harder to sync over Zoom. We are here with Nadia Shadravan, who will introduce herself in a minute. But before we start, we'd like to go around and do a quick get to know you question. So our question today is going to be, what is your favorite breakfast?
Okay. Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Great, I can start. My favorite breakfast has got to be a pain au chocolat. Love a chocolate croissant. There's nothing quite like it. It's buttery, it's tasty, it's amazing.
I think my son would completely agree with you. It doesn't matter where we are. That's usually, do they have pain au chocolat? Like, not everywhere has it, but if they have it, yes, you can have it. So excellent choice. What about you, Sanam?
My favorite has transitioned to fried plantains with eggs. I love the combo of like salty eggs with a really sweet fried plantain. And I feel like this is something that wherever you go, you can kind of find some fried plantains and some eggs. So it's pretty simple, and I
Definitely in the
just really
southern
enjoy.
hemisphere. Yeah. I it's so interesting because I in Jamaica, first of all, we say plantain, not plantains. So that's always sounds funny to me. But we don't salt our fried plantain, but like my favorite way to eat it is super duper ripe, deep fry it so that it's like crispy on the outside. And then I
Yeah.
learned from a Ghanaian friend to sprinkle a little bit of salt on it. And now it's just chef's kiss. Love it.
Mhm.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. I
Yeah,
would
weirdly, my daughter, she won't eat any fruits, but she'll eat fried plantains, and I have no idea why, but I don't question it. I just appreciate that she'll eat a fruit. So,
it's a win.
yeah.
I would say my favorite breakfast has changed. It used to be a smoothie. I used to have a smoothie every single morning. Now I'm more of just a get me my coffee or I can't talk to any other human being. And usually I'll have like a little protein bar or something like that. I don't think I have like a dream breakfast. I'm not really a big breakfast person, I think. Like I'd be happy with just a cup of coffee. But I mean, I'm open to French toast and all the yummy sweet treats. Certainly, but yeah, I think I'm more just I need coffee. That's a staple for me, every day. All right,
Nice.
so should we talk a little bit about what today's episode's about? Today, we're going to be talking with Nadia, who we're going to give an opportunity to introduce herself. Nadia was employed by USAID in Senegal. So, Nadia, do you want to tell us a little bit about the work that you've done and what brought you to Senegal?
Sure. So I've been working in the field of international development for basically my whole career, straight out of college, and after grad school and up until now. And before moving to Senegal, I was in Uganda with USAID, and now have been lucky enough to be in Senegal as well, and doing international development work, which is my passion. And helping the US government promote peace, stability, economic growth, health security, humanitarian assistance across the globe. So it's been a very, very wonderful journey and feel very privileged to be able to have had the career that I have had up until now.
That's just absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for the service that you've done around the world to kind of help the US establish those relationships in countries near and far. So it's really important work. I think we wanted to talk a little bit about why that work might be important to someone living in Shrewsbury or central Massachusetts or anywhere in the United States, because it's something that we talk about a lot. A lot of times when you hear that someone is doing USAID work in Senegal, in Uganda, that sounds really far away. And it's not always clear, like, how does that relate to me on a local level? And so we have some ideas about it, but we thought maybe it'd be good to kind of just start the conversation out, just kind of talking about how that impacts people locally. So, do you want to jump in on that, or do you want me to take it, Nadia? Does that speak to any?
I'd actually love to hear from Nadia first, and then maybe we can talk about kind of our perspective here in Shrewsbury.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think all of us are, more and more realizing that we live in a connected world, that most of the world's problems really transcend borders. Going through the COVID crisis was just such a great, illustration of that to me and to everybody I know. Suddenly, a disease that seems millions of miles away is here, and we are all experiencing the knock-on effects of that. And so that's really how I think about USAID's work. So I think about it in terms of, one, a beautiful display of the compassion and soul of the American people, that promotion of goodwill that has definitely lots of benefits to our own security and our own national standing internationally. But I also think about it in terms of, again, just dealing with these international global issues in ways that will prevent it, coming to our shores. So for example, right now, there's an Ebola outbreak in Uganda, and it is spreading. Ebola is just a plane ride away from Massachusetts. And USAID is unfortunately in the position, because of the freeze of foreign assistance, where they cannot respond to that. That is something that they would normally be responding to in collaboration with the government of Uganda, to really respond to that disease so that they can contain that outbreak. So that's just one example of, as we live in an increasingly global community, the problems that we're facing are not they're not problems that a country can face on its own. And we need the international effort to really build resilience to those problems, and we need to work together. And that's kind of how I think foreign assistance supports, everybody, no matter where you live in the United States.
I
I
love
think
that.
sometimes people don't realize that because these supports are in place, that we don't have to deal with certain issues because we are addressing them abroad. And then beyond that, locally, we've received a large number of migrant people that are being housed across Massachusetts. And there's a lot of emotions about this locally. Why are all these migrants coming to the United States? And part of that is that we have all these crises happening internationally, and there isn't anything really in place to substantially help with this. This is one small way that the US is contributing to helping countries develop so that people aren't fleeing the countries to come and seek shelter in a random town like Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. So I think that's why this global issue is very pertinent to us here locally, not just in Shrewsbury, but in all local communities.
And around the world. I mean, other countries
Um,
also depend on the United States to play this, not just a role of generosity and prosperity building around the world, but in a role of stability building, in a way that some of the neighbors to some of these countries really rely on us to do that work. And the US strategy to do that, right, has three prongs, right? We do it through defense efforts, we do it through diplomacy, and we do it through development. And that's what USAID is doing. It's the development work. It is the boots on the ground. It is the people making sure that people have access to food and water and things that are going to stabilize places so that their governments can then be stable, so that the world can then be stable. I tend to be more swayed personally, I think, by it's an important role to do because the US has prospered for hundreds of years on the backs of a lot of these other countries. And so to me, it feels right. But if that argument is not compelling to you, which is sort of what Nadia was pointing to in the first half of her remarks, then the argument that the rest of the world is depending on that stability as well as Sanam, as you said, our own shores, as our own doorsteps.
Yeah.
It's there's not really a good argument for why we would not want to maintain this work from that perspective, from my perspective. I've heard a lot of chit chatter online, and in person in our communities about the refugee crisis and about the crisis, but not a lot of ideas on how that tide might be turned. Just putting up a wall and letting the rest of the world destabilize is not, in my mind, a reasonable solution to long-term prosperity, not just abroad, not just in neighboring countries, but in the United States as well. But so it sounds like we're all pretty much on agreement on that issue. But I think that, because we are taking on an international topic today, we wanted to be clear to our neighbors that may be watching that this is something that impacts us right here, right at home.
Yeah. I'd
Absolutely.
like to hear more about specifically the type of work, Nadia, that you're doing in Senegal and how you've been impacted by the fact that this has all been shut down overnight.
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. I am a institutional support contractor for USAID. So because of the foreign assistance was frozen, all of the contracts were we received stop work orders. So we were immediately basically furloughed overnight. And I'm not unique. It's estimated 50,000 jobs overnight were basically lost and locked out of our email systems. And then since then, it's only gotten worse. So now we have foreign service officers who are being put on admin leave as of tomorrow. If you go to usaid.gov right now, it's a notice saying that they intend to bring everybody home um, by the end of the week, which is just logistically impossible. We have thousands of foreign service officers serving in missions all across the world in over 100 countries with their families. We've heard of contractors who have been stranded in places because they no longer can access their email and they're in conflict zones and can't get home. So it really is a crisis. On that front, that's how it's impacted me personally. But even more upsetting is that we have programs that can't operate. We have people who desperately need their medication, their antiretrovirals. We have babies who are being born with HIV who could have easily, that could have been totally prevented. Just within the last 2 weeks, we have people who are waiting for food in refugee camps, an estimated 500 tons of food that is about to go to waste because it has been sitting for 2 weeks and can't be distributed. I mean, if you want to talk about waste and abuse, this is it, stopping at this level and really delegitimizing relationships that we've worked for decades to build with other countries and governments. It's really, really heart-wrenching. The scale of suffering and devastation is really hard to even, wrap my head around. So that's kind of the level of what we're seeing across the globe right now.
Yeah. Hunger in particular stands out to me. I was reading online that USAID is one of the leading providers of food for children below the poverty line around the world. And to have that just completely shut down overnight is just a horrifying thought. I mean, right now in the United States, people are concerned about the cost of eggs. They're not
Yeah.
concerned about whether or not there are eggs.
Yeah.
And so it's just a scary thought to kind of think about and to hear that it's happening in real time and that there's not much that people who want to help can do. One of the things that we've been recommending for people to do is to find private charities that are doing some of this work to try to at least give some support in other ways to some of these communities. And a lot of people are hesitant to give money to private charities, as I think most people know, there's been a lot of uh, drama over the last 20 or so years with some of the private organizations that are doing work in some of these communities over how funds have been managed and about how much direct impact and aid actually comes out of some of these organizations. But that was just something that we had suggested sort of as a stopgap while while our nation kind of figures out what we're going to do with this USAID stuff.
Something else that has been concerning about this whole process is that it's not following a legal process. If you want to talk about shutting down this whole branch, we can go through the appropriate channels. Congress has the numbers to make this happen, and it would give people enough time to create a transition plan so that there isn't 500 tons of food just sitting there and rotting away, that it could at least be distributed, that at least some protocols could be put in place, some local initiatives could be set up. I don't know. There could have been some kind of plan, but to just end it overnight with something that honestly, I don't even understand how this is happening legally. I don't know how it's holding up.
It's
But
it's not
that's also
legal.
concerning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not legal at all. And just as you said, USAID was established by an act of Congress, and our money is congressionally appropriated. So the fact that an individual, and not just our president, I mean, Elon Musk and his cronies were able to shut down the USAID office and steal, data from our servers, and lock people out of their email accounts is really something we've just never seen before ever. And it should concern everyone.
Absolutely. I think back to when we pulled out of Afghanistan and
Yes,
the amount of outcry about the haste with which we pulled out and the amount of refugees that that created and the amount of turmoil that it created that I wouldn't be I'd be lying to say that I'm not surprised. I am not surprised that that sort of same approach has been taken here because so much critique was given to how could we just pull out of Afghanistan overnight? Look at the impacts of pulling out of Afghanistan overnight. And now we've basically done that in positions all over the world.
yeah,
It's a little uh it's surprising.
Simultaneously and with
Surprising.
no plan in place.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, this whole thing could have happened in a legal way. So I don't understand why we're choosing to take an illegal path instead of going through the legal path, which would have provided time to come up with a transition plan. Um,
absolutely. And one point I also want to make, because I've seen so much misinformation in the media recently about USAID and about the money it spends and the, and the programs that it, develops. And I want to say that like USAID operates on less than 1% of the federal budget. It is a tiny but very impactful organization. So when people stress about the millions of dollars and how it's being spent, I do want to caution everybody that by shutting down USAID's operations, we're not, saving the kind of money that I think people think that we're saving as a nation. And so I just wanted to highlight that. And I also want to highlight that USAID has very onerous monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and audits, very, very onerous requirements that every partner has to go through. It is not easy to just take money from USAID. It is usually competitively bid, and then there's, a ton of reporting requirements required. So just to state that, a lot of the information I've been seeing in the media is that it's just this slush fund and that, all kinds of rampant misuse is happening. And that is just not the case. That's just not factual.
And I mean, I think that the difference there, we talked a little bit about private charity donations as a stopgap, right? Like all of this information that you're talking about, all this reporting, it's publicly available. People can
Absolutely.
request this information and track where the dollars are going and where the man hours are going and how that, the US money is being spent in these programs. I
and there are
wanted
checks and balances
your
systems
checks and
there.
balances. I mean, you can FOIA any information from the government that you want, including what USAID is doing abroad. And I also want to talk a little bit about the strain on our government and on our community by the unemployment that this is going or has caused, right? Because now we have, I think you said 50,000 people who are now unemployed as a result of this singular action, who
Yeah.
need to come back home and may not have resources to do so, have to now look for new work. I mean, that is a substantial impact on our government, on our society to have that many people overnight.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the sector as a whole, I mean, USAID or foreign assistance more generally is a huge portion of the funds that are available for global disasters. And so having this amount of money, this proportion of money no longer available to respond to humanitarian crises, um, in the world globally, it impacts the United Nations, it impacts other multilateral agreements and agencies who would be typically responding to this, to these types of crises because they no longer have funding. UNICEF, relies on foreign assistance. It relies on other funding sources as well, but like there is a lot of work that's going to be impacted and is being impacted by this, and it's devastating.
I think
I wanted to back up to where you talked about how it's only 1% of the budget. I think a huge problem that I'm seeing, and it's interesting because I think we can attribute it to the fact that people don't actually understand what $1 billion is.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times people are talking about, where we're spending all this money abroad, we're spending all this money over here, over there. I actually used to work in trust and estate, and it's shocking how many tax loopholes are in place for the wealthiest in our nation. And it's something that's inaccessible to the average person. The only reason I learned about these things was because I was working and seeing these accounts, seeing these millions, billions of dollars just be passed down generation to generation, and evading huge amounts of money, um, just legally. They're legally evading huge amounts of money. And when we talk about what wealth is, I think a lot of people would think that millionaire and billionaire are similar, when they're vastly, vastly different. There's a lot of links online that you can click on to, show you the huge difference between million and billion. But I think when people are talking about money around the world, I think they're not really understanding that there's a handful of billionaires that are just hoarding all the world's waste. And then we're sitting here scrambling and arguing about pennies.
Yeah.
A lot of the conversation, I think, is rooted just in this misunderstanding of what a billion is, who deserves $1 billion, if anyone, and what should happen with those billions of dollars.
And so I think something too that just to jump off of that, I think that there was this idea that we pull back the resources that are going into USAID around the world, and that those resources are then going to somehow be magically uh, infused into perhaps communities in need in the United States. And that is not my understanding of what is happening here. It's not that we're pulling back this money so that we can then help help our veterans, help our elderly, help our unhoused, help our poor. In fact, it seems that the exact opposite is happening. There's been a lot of items in question, such as SNAP and EBT, and other social service items that that maybe some people believe that USAID money is then going to magically help, deserving individuals here, but that does not seem to be the direction that we're going in. And I think it's important to kind of say that out loud, because I think that is another misconception that I've seen a lot of people saying, well, we need that money because we have veterans that need it and we have people here, but that doesn't seem to be a one-to-one exchange or what actually is happening on the ground. And so I think it's important just to say that out loud.
No, for sure. Even the term deserving that you just used, I've been in, and I know all of you have been in conversations with lots of people, and the root almost comes down to who is deserving and who is not. Because if you make the argument that, okay, no one international, only domestic, then we go to domestic and we say, okay, what about people who are addicted to drugs? No, not them, they don't deserve it. What about people who have done
So
jail
that's
time? No, they don't deserve it. What about people who are having mental health crises? No, they should deal with that. So we don't seem to have consensus about who deserves help, when really the consensus should be that if you are human, you are deserving of human rights and resources.
right.
Um,
Yeah, and I think that that's the problem. And I mean, I think that we are going to all be kind of holding our breath to see kind of how this all shakes out. I anticipate that there are going to be lawsuits. I anticipate that there are going to be challenges. I'm not sure whether the Supreme Court will, grant a writ to any of these cases down the line, but it's going to be years before we see all of this stuff resolved, both internationally and nationally. And so I think that, as I said, any kind of action items that people can do to kind of help us stay the course are really appreciated. And, you know, like we gave an example here on this segment, but if there are others, if either of you can think of that we could do, or if people in the comments want to write, you know, here's something that I'm doing to kind of help us stay the course while we figure out how the US is going to manage its position internationally. I think that would be really helpful.
On a
Absolutely.
similar note, Nadia, are there ideas that you have? Are there any transition plans being created or
I think
anything?
at the moment, everyone I know who from the agency is working tirelessly to get our stories out, to talk to press, to contact our state representatives, our senators, really trying to draw attention to this issue. I think especially because there are so many people suffering, there's so much that has gone wrong. And I think there's just a hope that we can at least save USAID. And that's really the call to action. Call your senators, ask them what is going on with USAID and how that they can speak up to this. Because whatever happens with this agency, because of the illegal way in which it's being stopped, that is kind of the game plan that is going to be used for the other agencies. And if it's USAID today, it's Medicaid tomorrow, it's Social Security. And so I think what we're really trying to do is mobilize people to speak out against this. And then, of course, you know, we always ask people to act local but think global. Do the service that you can in your community. It goes a long way. There's no act that is of kindness that is, you know, wasted in any kind of way. But think about the global community that we're in, because the United States has a very important role, and it can be a very beautiful role, or it can be a role that is isolationist and becomes dangerous for our country. And so that's sort of my plea: is speak out, talk to your representatives, and do what you can locally.
That's so well said.
Yeah.
Nadia, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today, for sharing your insights of what it's like on the ground, and the impact of some of the policy decisions that are coming out right now in our country and how it's impacting people where you are, but also people here at home. And so we want to just thank you for the service that you've done and also for the insight that you've given us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me and for having this conversation. It's so important, and I love what you're doing.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Thanks for watching another episode of A Better Shrewsbury.